All right, so today we're going to do a deep dive on startups. We're going to be looking at The Lean Startup by Ries. I think what's really cool about this book is that this book isn't just for tech people out in Silicon Valley. It's a playbook for anyone, really, anyone creating something new, no matter how big or small, under conditions of uncertainty.
Yeah, it's interesting how it challenges the traditional kind of like go big or go home mentality,
Hmm.
Instead of relying on those massive business plans, the ones that often just gather dust before they're even finished. Rees advocates for a more dynamic and a more responsive approach.
Yeah, it's like, are you really going to write a novel before you even know if people want to read it?
Yeah.
But what I find really fascinating is how he actually defines a startup, because it's not just about being, small or scrappy. He calls it a human institution designed to create a new product or service under conditions of extreme uncertainty.
Right. And that uncertainty piece is key. I mean, it's really what separates startups from just smaller versions of big companies. They operate in a world where so much is unknown, and that can be both terrifying and exhilarating.
Totally. It's like setting off on an adventure without a map. You might have a compass, but you're not exactly sure where you're going to end up. So how do you navigate that uncertainty? That's where this idea of validated learning comes in, right?
Exactly. Validated learning is all about testing your assumptions, gathering data from real customers, and then you use that data to actually refine your strategy. It's about being scientific in your approach to building a business, rather than relying on gut feelings or intuition.
So you're like a detective looking for clues, trying to solve this mystery of what your customer actually wants. And sometimes those clues lead you in unexpected directions, like the example that Ries gives about IMVU, the avatar-based instant messaging platform. What was it that tripped them up initially? Because it seemed like a pretty cool product.
They did. On the surface, they had a cool product, but they made a classic mistake. They assumed that they knew what their customers wanted, without actually testing those assumptions. They thought people would want to use avatars to chat with their existing friends on platforms like AOL Instant Messenger.
So they were trying to piggyback off of those existing networks
Yeah.
instead of creating their own space.
Exactly. But then through direct customer interaction, what they discovered was that people were actually more interested in using avatars to make new friends. So their whole initial premise was flawed.
That's a pretty big misstep. But they were able to pivot based on this validated learning, right?
They were. They ditched the whole add-on approach. And they built their own standalone network focused on avatars. And that pivot led to their eventual success. Which just goes to show that talking to your customers early and often is crucial. You can't get so attached to your brilliant idea that you miss those vital signals from the market.
It's like being so focused on the destination that you miss all the scenery along the way. And sometimes those detours lead you to some more amazing places. But how do you translate this validated learning into action? What are the concrete steps?
That's where Ries introduces this concept of the build, measure, learn feedback loop. It's a cycle of continuous innovation.
I've heard that mentioned a lot. Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, so it starts with building a minimum viable product or an MVP. This isn't about perfection. It's about building the simplest version possible to test your key assumptions.
So an MVP is like a prototype. It's a way to get something out there quickly, just to see if it floats.
Exactly. Then comes the measure phase, where you track how customers are responding to your MVP. What are they doing? What's working? What's not? What are they saying?
I bet that learn stage is where the real magic happens.
It is. You analyze all that data, and you decide whether to pivot or persevere. So to pivot means to change course, and to persevere means to keep pushing forward. On your current path,
This whole build, measure, learn loop, it just feels like this constant dance between action and reflection, intuition and data. And it makes me wonder, are there times when that never give up attitude can actually backfire?
that's a great question. Ries actually challenges the myth of perseverance. He says it's tempting to just keep pushing when things are tough, but the lean startup approach favors data over blind faith.
So how do you know when to call it quits? When does perseverance turn into stubbornness?
I think the key is recognizing what Ries calls the land of the living dead. Companies that are showing some signs of life, like maybe they have some revenue, maybe a few customers, but they're not truly thriving. They're clinging to what he calls vanity metrics.
Vanity metrics, those sound like a trap. What are they?
Vanity metrics are those numbers that make you feel good, but they don't actually reflect the health of your business. So for example, you could have a ton of downloads, but how many people are actually using your app? Or maybe you have a lot of website traffic, but does it translate into sales?
It's like empty calories. It might look good, but it's not providing any real sustenance. I think he uses the example of Grocket, the online education platform.
He does. Initially, they focused on vanity metrics like total customers and questions answered, which made them look good on paper. But it wasn't translating into real learning or sustainable growth. They were growing, but they weren't truly learning.
It seems like shifting away from those vanity metrics would require a lot of testing and experimentation just to figure out what the real indicators of progress are.
Exactly. They started using split testing, where you offer different versions of your product to different groups of customers to see what resonates. And that's how they learned that students actually prefer having choice in how they study, which is an insight they never would discover without testing.
So split testing is like running these mini experiments
Yeah.
just to figure out what works best. And that actually reminds me of how he draws this parallel to Toyota's manufacturing revolution, focusing on small batches.
That's a brilliant connection. Because Toyota's success wasn't just about building great cars, it was also about their production approach. They pioneered the idea of working in smaller batches, which allowed them to identify and fix problems much faster than their mass production rivals.
So instead of churning out thousands of identical cars,
Yeah.
they focused on producing smaller, more diverse batches.
Yes. And this small batch principle applies beautifully to innovation as well. Building and releasing products in smaller chunks leads to faster feedback, faster learning, and less wasted effort.
This is actually making me think about how many times I've tried to do too much at once, and I just end up getting completely overwhelmed, this small batch mentality. I feel like that could apply to life in general. But can you give us some concrete examples of how startups have actually implemented this approach?
Absolutely. One example Ries highlights is Alphabet Energy, a clean tech company. They're developing a device to generate electricity from waste heat. But instead of building everything from scratch, they cleverly designed their product to be manufactured using existing silicon wafer infrastructure.
So they basically hacked the system by leveraging existing technology to streamline their production process.
That's a great way to put it. This allowed them to go from concept to physical prototype in just 6 weeks. It also allowed them to experiment rapidly with different materials and designs. It's a stark contrast to the traditional approach of spending months or even years developing a product before getting any real-world feedback.
So the difference between trying to navigate a maze blindfolded versus having a map. The small batch approach gives you more visibility, and it allows you to adjust your course as you go.
It does, and it leads to the next crucial element, which is understanding your engine of growth. Not all growth is created equal. Ries identifies 3 distinct engines that power businesses: sticky, viral, and paid.
Okay, this sounds intriguing. Tell me more about these engines. Like, which one should I be gunning for?
Well, it all depends on the nature of your business and your goals. The sticky engine is all about attracting and retaining customers for the long haul. So think about subscription services like Netflix or Spotify. They want to keep you engaged and coming back for more.
So they're really focused on building a loyal fan base.
Exactly. Then there's the viral engine, where growth explodes from person to person. Think about social media platforms like Facebook or Instagram. Their growth is fueled by users inviting their friends. The product itself is inherently shareable.
Like a digital chain reaction.
Yeah.
And what about the paid engine? That sounds pretty straightforward.
It is. It's the more traditional advertising and marketing model. You're essentially buying customers through targeted campaigns.
So it's about strategically investing to get your message in front of the right people.
Precisely. Each of these engines has its own unique characteristics and requires different strategies for success. The key is to identify which engine is powering your business and then tailor your efforts accordingly.
It's like choosing the right fuel for your car. You wouldn't want to put diesel in a gas engine. But even with the right fuel, things can still go wrong. What happens when your chosen engine starts to sputter? Is that when those pivots come into play?
That's a great point. And it actually highlights the need for building adaptive organizations. But that's a topic best left for the next part of our deep dive. So picking up where we left off, let's delve into this idea of building adaptive organizations. It's not just about choosing the right growth engine. It's about creating a company culture that really embraces change and continuous learning.
Yeah, it makes me think about how some companies are like these giant ships. You know, they're slow to turn, they're resistant to change. But in the startup world, you need to be more like a speedboat, able to maneuver quickly and adapt to choppy waters.
That's a great analogy. And the lean startup offers some pretty practical strategies for building that agility into your organization. One powerful technique Ries highlights is the 5 whys analysis. It's a structured way to get to the root cause of problems, instead of just treating the symptom.
I've heard of 5 whys. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, right? You keep asking why 5 times to get to those underlying issues. It seems so simple, but I can see how it could be really powerful.
It is, and it's not just for startups either. Ries shares a great example of how IGN Entertainment, a large online media company, used 5 whys to improve their website stability.
Oh, interesting.
They were plagued by frequent crashes, and instead of just throwing more tech at the problem, they decided to dig a little deeper.
So they didn't just apply a Band-Aid solution.
No, they didn't. They used 5 whys to uncover the root cause, which turned out to be a communication breakdown between different teams, not a lack of technical expertise.
Wow.
So by addressing that underlying issue, they dramatically improved their site stability.
That's a great example of how a seemingly technical problem can actually have a human cause. It makes me think about all the times I jump to conclusions without really understanding the full context of a situation.
It's a common trap. And 5 whys is a great tool for avoiding that trap. It forces you to slow down, ask questions, challenge your assumptions.
It's like being a detective again. Gathering evidence, following the trail wherever it leads. But how do you actually create a company culture where this kind of critical thinking and problem solving
Yeah.
is just embedded in the DNA of the organization?
That's where this concept of the innovation sandbox comes in. It's like a safe space within a company where teams can experiment without the fear of failure.
So it's a place where you can break things without breaking the whole company.
Exactly. The innovation sandbox is all about fostering that entrepreneurial spirit within a larger organization. It allows teams to explore new ideas, test new products, try new approaches, without jeopardizing the core business.
It makes me think about how kids learn best through play. You know they're not afraid to experiment, get messy, make mistakes, and that's often how the most creative ideas emerge.
That's a great point. And Ries argues that we need to create that same kind of playful, experimental environment within our organizations. He emphasizes the importance of giving these innovation teams what he calls scarce but secure resources.
Scarce but secure.
Yeah, so they need enough resources to make meaningful progress, but not so much that a failure would be catastrophic for the company.
So it's about striking that balance between giving them freedom to explore, but also managing risk for the overall company.
Precisely. And they also need independent authority, the freedom to make decisions and move quickly without getting bogged down in bureaucracy.
Right, because nothing kills creativity and momentum faster than having to get approval from like 5 different departments before you can even test an idea.
Exactly. And Ries also stresses the importance of a personal stake in the outcome. So the people working on these innovation projects need to feel like they have skin in the game, that their success is tied to the success of the project.
It's about fostering that sense of ownership and accountability.
Yes. And that leads to the next important consideration, which is establishing clear ground rules and expectations for these innovation experiments.
Right, because even though you want to give them freedom to explore, you can't just let them run wild.
Exactly. So Ries outlines a few key principles for managing these experiments. First, you need to protect the parent organization from the inherent risks of experimentation.
So you're saying you don't want one of these experiments to accidentally blow up the whole company?
Precisely. It's about putting safeguards in place to contain the potential fallout if an experiment goes awry.
Makes sense.
Second, accountability is crucial. These teams need to be held accountable for their results. It's not just about having fun and experimenting. They need to demonstrate that they're learning and making progress towards meaningful goals.
So it's a balance between freedom and responsibility.
Exactly. And that's where clear exit criteria come into play. You need to define specific milestones that need to be met before an experiment can graduate from the sandbox.
So you're saying it's not just about gut feelings or random hunches. It's about having data-driven metrics to decide whether an experiment is worth continuing or not.
Precisely. These exit criteria might include things like achieving certain revenue targets, demonstrating a certain level of customer adoption, or proving that the innovation can be scaled effectively. The key is to have a clear, objective framework for evaluating success.
And I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. The innovation sandbox, Clear exit criteria, actionable metrics. It's like a recipe for fostering innovation within a larger organization.
It is. And Ries provides some great examples of companies that have successfully implemented these concepts. One notable example is Intuit,
Yeah.
the company behind financial software like TurboTax and QuickBooks. They're known for being incredibly innovative.
Oh, Intuit. I use their software all the time. What do they do?
They created what Ries calls an island of freedom for their SnapTax team.
The tap tax.
Yeah, SnapTax is their mobile app for filing taxes.
Oh, yeah. That's a super convenient way to do your taxes.
Exactly. And the SnapTax team was given the autonomy to operate outside of Intuit's normal bureaucratic processes. They were able to experiment, learn, iterate rapidly. And the result? They created a truly groundbreaking product.
It makes me think about how sometimes the best way to innovate is to create a little bit of chaos and then see what emerges.
That's a great insight.
Now,
Sometimes you need to shake things up a bit to break free from the inertia of the status quo.
these examples are so inspiring. They show how the lean startup principles can be applied across various industries and business models. It's not just about tech startups. It's about creating a culture of experimentation and learning in any organization.
Absolutely. But it's important to remember that pivots aren't just about changing your product. They can involve fundamental shifts in your target market, your revenue model, or even your underlying technology.
So you're saying you need to be willing to question every aspect of your business.
Yes. Another great example of this is Wealthfront, a company that initially focused on creating online games for investing.
Online games for investing. That sounds like a fun way to learn about a topic that's often seen as dry and intimidating.
It was. Their idea was to make investing more engaging and accessible for a younger audience.
I love that concept.
Did it work? Well, they were able to attract users to their games, but they soon realized that these users weren't actually converting into paying customers for their core investment management services.
So they had a disconnect between their initial product and their ultimate business goal.
Exactly. They were stuck in what Ries calls an innovation trap. Their games were fun and engaging, but they weren't driving the kind of growth they needed.
So what did they do? Did they just give up on the whole idea of investment management?
No, they pivoted. They realized that their real strength lay in their sophisticated investment algorithms, not in game development.
So they decided to focus on what they were truly good at.
Precisely. They shifted their focus from creating games to building a robust automated investment platform for individual investors. They went from entertainment to a more serious, data-driven approach.
And that pivot proved to be successful.
Incredibly so. Wealthfront became a leader in the robo-advisory space, managing billions of dollars in assets for their clients. Their story really highlights the importance of recognizing your core strengths and aligning your business model accordingly.
It's like finding your superpower and then figuring out how to use it to make a real impact in the world.
Exactly. And Wealthfront's story is a great illustration of what Ries calls the zoom-in pivot.
A zoom-in pivot. I've never heard of that. What is it?
It's when a feature that was initially a small part of your product becomes the whole product, like taking a supporting actor and making them the star of the show.
Interesting. So it's about recognizing the hidden potential within your existing product or service.
Yes. In Wealthfront's case, their investment algorithms were initially just a component of their games, but they realized that those algorithms were the real value proposition, so they zoomed in on them and made them the centerpiece of their business.
It's a reminder that sometimes the best ideas are already right in front of us. We just need to see them with fresh eyes. It seems like pivots can be as much about subtraction as they are about addition.
You're right. Sometimes the key to success is not about adding more features or complexity, but about simplifying and focusing on what truly matters.
It makes me think about how we often try to solve problems by adding more things, when sometimes the answer is actually to take things away.
That's a profound insight, and it applies to so many aspects of life, not just business.
This whole conversation about pivots has been so eye-opening. It's given me a whole new perspective on how to navigate uncertainty and found my path to success, both in my professional life and in my personal life.
I'm glad to hear that. And I think the key takeaway here is that pivots are not signs of failure. They're signs of learning and adaptation. They're about being willing to challenge your assumptions and adjust your course based on what the data is telling you.
Which brings us back to the importance of being data-driven. Moving away from those gut feelings and intuition and letting hard evidence guide our decisions.
Exactly. And one of the most powerful tools for gathering that evidence is split testing, or A/B testing as it's often called, you're essentially comparing different versions of something to see which one performs better.
I've definitely heard of A/B testing, but I always thought of it as more of a marketing technique. You're saying it can be applied to other aspects of the business as well.
Absolutely. It's a scientific way to test your assumptions and make data-informed decisions about everything from website design to product features to even internal processes.
So instead of just guessing what will work, you're running these controlled experiments to see what actually resonates with your customers.
Precisely. Ries shares an example of how Grocket, the online education platform we talked about earlier, used split testing to make a surprising discovery about their lazy registration feature.
Lazy registration, what's that?
So lazy registration is a common technique where users can start using a service without creating an account right away. The idea is to reduce friction and get people engaged with the product as quickly as possible.
So you're removing those barriers to entry.
Exactly. But Grocket was surprised to find that their lazy registration feature wasn't actually having the intended effect.
Really? How do they figure that out?
They ran a split test where they compared two groups of users. One group was required to register immediately. The other group could use lazy registration. The results: the two groups had the same registration, activation, and retention rates.
Wow, that's unexpected. So all that effort they put into implementing lazy registration was basically wasted.
It was. And this is a perfect example of how split testing can challenge your assumptions and lead to data-driven decisions. Sometimes what seems like a best practice or a common sense approach might not actually have the desired effect.
It's like trying to fix a leaky faucet by tightening the handle.
Uh-huh.
When the real problem is a loose pipe underneath the sink, you need to look beneath the surface to find the root cause.
That's a great analogy. And split testing is a powerful tool for doing just that. It allows you to identify those underlying causes and effects that are driving your business results.
This is making me think about all the times I've made decisions based on assumptions or gut feelings, only to find out later that I was wrong. It seems like split testing could be a valuable tool for making more informed decisions in all areas of life.
It could, and it highlights the importance of choosing the right metrics to track.
Right. We talked about vanity metrics earlier, those feel-good numbers that don't actually tell you much about the health of your business. But what are some examples of good, actionable metrics that startups should be tracking? Like, what kind of data should we be paying attention to?
So Ries emphasizes focusing on metrics that are actionable, accessible,
I mean,
auditable.
okay, let's unpack those one by one. Starting with actionable.
Right.
I'm guessing that means they tell you what specific actions to take to improve your results.
Exactly. They clearly demonstrate cause and effect. So for example, instead of just tracking the total number of website visitors, you might track the percentage of visitors who complete a specific action, like signing up for your email list or adding a product to their cart.
I see. So you're really focusing on the behaviors
Yeah.
that actually drive business growth.
Right. And then accessible metrics mean that the data is easy to understand and available to everyone in the company who needs it.
So it's not locked away in some secret spreadsheet
Yeah.
that only the data scientists can decipher.
Exactly. Ries believes that everyone in the company should have access to the key metrics that are driving the business. It creates transparency and a culture of data-driven decision-making.
That makes sense. It really empowers everyone to contribute to the success of the company.
Yes. And finally, auditable metrics are those that can be verified and trusted. It's about making sure that the data you're using is accurate and reliable.
So you're saying it's not enough to just have data. You need to have confidence in the data.
Precisely. Ries highlights the importance of having clear definitions for your metrics and making sure everyone understands how the data is being collected and calculated. It builds trust and ensures that everyone is on the same page.
It's like making sure your measuring tape is accurate before you start cutting wood for a bookshelf. If your measurements are off, the whole project will be a disaster.
I love that analogy. Accurate data is the foundation of any successful lean startup experiment.
This has been such an insightful exploration of how companies can use data to navigate uncertainty and make better decisions. It's actually making me think about how I can apply these principles to my own life and work.
I'm glad to hear that. And that's really the power of the lean startup methodology. It's not just a set of tools and techniques, it's a mindset. It's about being curious, being experimental, and always being willing to learn and adapt.
It's about embracing the unknown and using it to your advantage.
Exactly. And that brings us to the final piece of the lean startup puzzle. But we'll have to save that for the last part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we're back. And I'm ready to tackle this final piece of the lean startup puzzle. We've talked about so many great concepts, but I'm still really curious about this innovation accounting idea. What is it, and why does it matter?
Well, it's one of those ideas that seems kind of obvious once you hear it, but it really challenges the traditional way we think about measuring success, especially in the startup world. Ries argues that traditional accounting metrics, things like return on investment or ROI, can actually be misleading when applied to early-stage startups.
That's interesting. Why would that be?
Well, because traditional accounting doesn't really account for the inherent uncertainty in experimentation. That's at the core of the lean startup approach. It's like trying to measure the success of a research expedition solely based on how much money was spent, without considering the new discoveries or insights gained along the way.
I see. So it's about shifting the focus from purely financial outcomes to measuring learning and progress towards a sustainable business.
Exactly. Innovation accounting is about recognizing that the true value of a startup lies not just in its current revenue or profits, but in its potential for future growth and innovation.
Okay, so how do you actually put this innovation accounting idea into practice? What does it look like in the real world?
Well, Rees outlines three key principles: use actionable metrics, establish baselines, and track learning milestones.
All right, let's unpack those. We've talked about actionable metrics already. Those are the ones that actually tell you what to do, not just how things are going.
Right. They're the metrics that directly inform your decisions and actions. Then there's establishing baselines, which is simply setting a starting point for those metrics so you can track progress over time. It's like taking a before picture. Before you start a new fitness routine, you need to know where you're starting from to measure how far you've come.
That makes total sense. And what about those learning milestones? What are those all about?
Learning milestones are specific, measurable goals that demonstrate you're actually gaining valuable knowledge and making progress towards a sustainable business. They're not just about hitting arbitrary revenue targets. They're about proving that your assumptions are valid and your business model is on the right track.
So they're kind of like those checkpoints on a long journey. They help you make sure you're heading in the right direction and make those course corrections along the way.
That's a great way to put it. For example, a learning milestone might be to achieve a certain level of customer retention or to prove that you can acquire customers for less than the lifetime value of those customers. These milestones should be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, much like any well-defined goal.
This whole concept of innovation accounting really resonates with me. It's about shifting the focus from short-term gains to long-term learning and growth.
It is, and it's about embracing the iterative nature of the startup journey. It's not about getting everything right on the first try. It's about constantly experimenting, learning, and adapting along the way.
This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive into the lean startup. We've covered so much ground, from validated learning and pivoting to building adaptive organizations and innovation accounting.
It's been a pleasure unpacking these concepts with you, and I think what's most exciting is that these principles can be applied not just to businesses, but to really any endeavor where you're trying to create something new.
Absolutely. Whether you're launching a new product, starting a business, or even just tackling a challenging project in your personal life, the lean startup methodology can provide a really powerful framework for navigating that uncertainty and achieving success.
The key is to embrace experimentation, be open to feedback, and never stop learning. And remember, the journey is just as important as the destination. The insights you gain along the way are often more valuable than the final outcome.
So well said. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. I feel like I have a whole new set of tools and perspectives now to apply to my own endeavors.
It was my pleasure. And just remember, the lean startup is not a one-size-fits-all solution. It's a mindset, a way of thinking about problems and approaching challenges. So take what resonates with you, adapt it to your own context, and keep innovating.
Until next time, happy experimenting.